Hello, all, and welcome back to a new episode of TV and Us, a conversation show about the TV series we just can't stop talking about. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And each season, we focus on a different show, reviewing it episode by episode, and we invite you to watch along with us. Right now, we are reviewing Severance Season 2, and today we are on episode 6, titled Attila. Sarah, do you want to kick us off with a summary for episode 6?
Bonds are tested. Mark continues on his path of discovery.
That's one way to call it, his path of discovery. Wow. As are we all, aren't we? Just trying to figure out who we are, like the rest of every character on this dang show. Okay, Let's start out with this episode titles of choice for episode 6. Sarah, what is yours?
My title is Let's Do It.
Oh, yeah, that works for like literally every situation in this episode.
Yeah.
My episode title is Childish Folly.
Yes, so good.
Okay, well, let's share our high-level thoughts about episode 6, and then we will quickly give a spoiler alert very soon after, and then dive fully in, because there's a lot that happens in this episode, as seems to always be the case with Severance. So, Sarah, how did episode 6 land with you?
Yeah, I struggled with this episode a little bit. I think there's a lot of really good and interesting things that happen in this episode. Obviously, we get the Irv and Bert dinner that I've been looking forward to. Good stuff happening with Milchick, with Dylan. So there's a lot of really interesting things. I think I am back to once again really struggling with Mark. And
this is the episode for it.
I don't know what to do with Mark right now. But outside of him, I'm really interested in a lot of other things that are happening in the show and with these characters. So for me, this one was a little bit more mixed, just because like I'm really struggling with Mark right now. But everything else, like when I'm looking back through my notes, there's so many interesting and cool things that happened. So yeah, a little bit maybe more mixed for me on this episode, but there's a lot of good things that are teeing up what is going to be a really interesting final few episodes. What about you? How did this land with you?
Yeah, I feel like I'm having whiplash with this show, because there's some episodes that are just absolutely thrilling and genius, and then there's some that are giving me PTSD to like the whole back half of season 1, where I'm like, wait, so what are we doing, and like what's our goal, and what is happening? Like I'm learning things along the way, but I'm feeling a little bit more disconnected to the character. So I definitely felt a lot more of that in this episode. The thing that my mind spent the most time thinking about is that framing of adolescence that you shared about the creator of Severance detailing a little bit more in one of those post-episode segments. And I think that's really interesting and makes this episode far more exciting from like a meta-cognitive level. So yeah, I think we had such a high from episode 4, and then kind of the aftermath of all of that in episode 5. And I'm sure that I'm going to look back and see episode 6 and some of the things that are some of the seeds that are planted in this episode feeling really significant later on. But I don't know, this just felt like we kind of almost hit reset a little bit, and we were starting a whole nother trajectory, and very much still in the slow, like, okay, we're getting started phase. So I would have liked to see a little bit more momentum from this episode. I think that there's some interesting seeds of doubt that are planted about certain characters, which I'm excited to talk a little bit more about. So on the whole, I would say this was not my favorite episode of the season, and it's reminding me a little bit of how I felt about season 1.
Yeah, I felt that too. I think for me, by the end of this episode, I was wondering, like, what are we doing? You know, obviously we are progressing in certain areas, and, you know, characters are making decisions, which are interesting, but it's what is the larger point? You know, the season started with, okay, we're going to find Miss Casey. and we're going to find where she is, and we're going to all rally together, and we're going to find her. And no progress has been made on that front. And now we're all distracted and like doing our own things, which can be interesting. But I miss that sense of forward momentum that
Mm,
I feel like we had in the first few episodes of this season. And to me, this one definitely felt more like a little meandering.
mhm.
It's all good stuff that's happening. There's a lot of interesting things that are happening, but by the end of the episode, I definitely was craving that sense of where are we going and what are we doing?
Yes, and I think maybe it's also because we just had two big splashy episodes where there's a lot of new interesting ideas to chew on and think about. And I think episode 6 very much revisits a lot of those interesting topics and concepts. And so we kind of like revisit the things that we were introduced to in the first few episodes. And they are pushed a little bit forward, but maybe not enough for it to feel really satisfying. And I feel like on the whole, the entire episode is revisiting like past territory that we've already kind of traversed a little bit. So we're revisiting Dylan and his wife having those secret meetings. And there's some new developments that happen in choices that some of those characters make, but there's nothing like big, there's no big steps that we're making here. We kind of revisit Milchek and his growth that's needed as a result of his performance review. And there's some interesting things there. But again, nothing net new, no big steps were taken forward on that front as well. And then obviously the Helly and Mark relationship, we are very much revisiting again. They take some steps forward, but maybe they're all just not big and groundbreaking enough for it to feel like we moved significantly in any direction. And we're also not introducing new worlds and new places in the world of Severance. And so there's also not that for us to chew on and like feel like we're discovering and exploring as well. So yeah, it's almost like a rehashing of a lot of the themes that were kicked off and introduced in the season so far with little baby step progress that like again, I'm sure we will look back and see that there was a lot that was set in motion from episode 6, but I would have liked to see a little bit more pace forward.
Yeah, this one definitely feels like a bridge between what's already happened and then like the final 3 episodes of the season. Like it feels like it's a pivotal episode, but I didn't connect with this one
Yeah.
quite as much. Yeah, I do think it's smart though, because like you said, we have had episode 4 is just like, wow, bonkers. Like so much happens, and then episode 5 is the fallout from that. And so there's so much that we've seen happen in the previous 2 episodes that it's probably wise for us to have an episode like this that's a little bit more level setting, kind of seeing where everybody's at, seeing some maybe conflicting priorities between everybody to kind of set up the final 3 episodes that are going to be just bonkers, I'm sure. So
Mm-hmm.
I I do feel that this is an important episode. I just, after episode 4 and then episode 5, this one felt a little bit more like a letdown for me.
Yeah, agreed. We are thirsty for some action. We want to see some shit hit the fan, you know? And I feel like we got that. And so now our palates are desiring for it. And maybe we'll look back and see that like, man, yeah, the show needed to kind of like slow it down a little bit and hold the brakes and really allow us time to reset and go on a whole nother big push that they're gonna take us on over the next 3 episodes. I didn't even realize that there's only 3 left, right? There's 8 episodes in this season total. No,
Maybe
there's
there's
10.
10.
There's 10. Okay. Yeah. So we've got a whole 4 more episodes left, which is crazy. So that's a long runway. That's a long runway.
Mhm.
So maybe this is the right time for us to like, okay, let's catch our breath, gather your thoughts, people, collect all of your little details that you've gathered along the way, and get ready for the next half of this journey. So we'll include a spoiler here if you haven't seen episode 6. As always with Severance, you need to go in blind. So stop listening to this episode if you haven't watched the episode 6 quite yet. So, all right, we're diving fully in. Sarah, what are some big things that stood out to you that happens or are revealed or are suggested in this episode?
We get our dinner.
Mm-hmm.
I was so pleased. I was
Yeah.
so happy. I wanted, like, everything that I wanted, I got. It was great. We got some good Bert and Irving moments. We got to meet Fields, who is just a delight. Oh my gosh, he is so salty, and I loved it. And the tension in that scene was just insane. Great performances. I was so entertained. I want so much more of Bert and Irv and Fields. I want more of all three of them. I am happy as a clam.
It really delivered on everything that you're hoping for. And I think the banter and the dialogue and kind of the reading in between the lines that all three of those humans are doing together in that room is fascinating as they're like darting eyes and passing glances with each other. I think there's just so much subtext in that scene, which makes it really, really fun. And notable that the episode chooses to end with that. It almost knows that we are waiting for that big moment to happen, that it teed up in the previous episode, and it's going to make us wait to get there.
And I'm glad that we got the dinner in this episode. I would have been so upset if they teed up this dinner and they didn't do it in episode 6. I would have been so angry. So I'm pleased that there's a lot of things that Severance will tee up and then just string us along for. But I'm glad that this dinner was not one of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And what was interesting to me, I'm curious your read on this in the ending, but it was notable to me that there's obviously this discrepancy and this detail that surfaced up in the dinner conversation around Irving thinking that the severance procedure was introduced 12 years ago, and then Fields seems to let it slip, or, as Bert suggests, maybe misremembered and said that it was 20 years ago. But there's this long shot on Bert's face as he's standing at the front door watching Irving leave right before he closes the door. And there's so many mixed intentions on his face. There's a little bit of some scheminess that I detected in there. It's also notable that Drummond from the Lumen Corporation knows exactly when Irving's out the door to go to Bert and Fields' place for dinner, and that's the moment and period of time where he goes in and is able to uncover that hidden locked box of Irv's research of all of the severed workers at Lumen. So there's just a lot of interesting coincidences, some suggestive long shots in that scene that I'm curious your thoughts about. And if you had any interpretations of what the show might be suggesting there.
Here's the thing. We know that Lumen is just shady as hell.
Mm-hmm.
We know they're doing some shady stuff. And so this is not that surprising to me.
Mm-hmm.
So we know something shady going on. We don't know maybe exactly what the shadiness is, but it's interesting that Bert and possibly Fields are in on it too.
Yeah.
I did appreciate that Drummond, I think, has the word frolic tattooed on his hand. I loved that little detail, and the fact that he has brought that level of whimsy into his life, so much to be tattooed on his hand. But yeah, I think that opens up a really interesting piece of this as well. And we learn that from Helena that her father is the one that invented the severance procedure. So it's interesting that the show is kind of dropping these little hints for us, these little breadcrumbs, if you will, about Lumen and how this severed procedure came about. We're starting to learn a little bit more as Mark is having that undone in his brain. So I find all of these little things all coming in this same episode really interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know what they mean. I don't know where we're going, but I think it's notable that they're all dropped in this one episode together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And some suggestive aspects and components of just how far Lumen's reach is with Burton Field's story around them wandering into a church where the message that was being preached that day is specifically around like the opportunity for innies to reach heaven. And like the way, I mean, we wouldn't put it past Lumen, but we're getting like far more insight into just how much Lumen is leveraging and activating many parts of society to push forward their ideology and their propaganda and to recruit more willing humans into their grand experiment that they are scheming around. So just the far-reaching tentacles of Lumen, I feel like, are really being revealed in these small little ways. And I thought that conversation and that particular detail was quite notable. And here are two people that have been successfully influenced by Lumen through this other medium beyond Lumen being the face of it. No, Lumen is now employing so many of these other systems, forces in societies, communities to further their end goals.
Yeah, I thought that was such an interesting touch too, especially the way that religion can be weaponized in service of
Yeah.
propaganda. And I thought that was just a really interesting touch, and especially looking at our world today and the way that churches and sermons can be used to influence people and around a particular idea or ideology. And I also think the marrying of like religion with industry, and we see that all the time, like the corporatization of church and religion and things like that. So I thought that was such an interesting component of this episode to kind of see, like you were saying, the far-reaching tentacles of Lumen and exposing some of what we're seeing in our world today. Maybe not as blatant as this, but man, that is a real thing that really happens. So that was a notable moment.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also it's like seeing Irving's reaction in that conversation too, of he's trying to wrap his mind around it all in real time, and very much the audience standing for us of just like, that is the backstory. I see. And him trying to just, keep his cool, try and make space for the conversation that's unfolding before him, and try and keep it together, as he's learning all of these details about really these two strangers that he doesn't know, he has never met before, and is invited into their home. And he does a great job. Shout out to Irving.
Yeah, shout out to Irving indeed. He is a real one. But I also think it's really interesting given, the other backstories that we know of the people who have been severed. Obviously, like Mark, as a way to kind of almost avoid his grief, did the procedure. Helly, we know about Helena. Dylan, doesn't really feel like he knows what his purpose is. And, he is finding meaning in his innie world. So it's just interesting to see a very different reason for somebody to go through the severed procedure. So I'm curious again, as the world continues to expand, if we meet additional severed workers, what will their rationale for undergoing this procedure be?
Yeah. And we don't know actually for a lot of the other characters quite yet of what their motivations were. And we've primarily focused on Mark and his Audi's backstory, but it's been fascinating to see like what are the other ways that Lumen has somehow convinced people that this is the path for them, like this is right for them, and what are those things that maybe we and our Audi selves are running from or are desiring, that Lumen is promising something. They're selling something that is making it easier for us to really buy into it somehow.
Yep. And they are good at selling. For sure.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Okay. Other big things that happened in this episode, I really want to talk a little bit about the conversation between Dylan's wife and Audi Dylan. And we've always, I think, from that first scene when this plot line is introduced, kind of been wary and skeptical of whoever this person was that was playing Dylan's wife, that is apparently his actual Audie's wife, and how Lumen has somehow used or manipulated her, how she's colluding with them to create this whole smoke and mirrors experience of any Dylan feeling like he's getting to connect with his Audi wife. And we now learn more. So she very clearly hides the truth from him and says that they canceled the session when in fact they had a whole session where they actually kissed and really connected deeply in that session. So I'm curious your thoughts about that scene. That seems like a big development in a core plot line so far of the show in this season.
Yeah, that is interesting. I think we're just gonna have to wait and see like what that amounts to. Like I have so many questions about her specifically because the show seems to be focusing on her pretty heavily. And so I want to know what she is going to do in all of this and like what part is she going to play in this? And then also like how much of what she's doing is approved by Lumen, you know, because the first time that they met, wasn't Miss Wong there or she was watching and would like kind of like talk to them or like coach them or something. Like the first session was observed, unless I completely made that up in my brain. And so I don't know. It would be weird to me honestly, it would be weird to me if anything that's going on in this show is not being closely observed by Lumen. Like, so that is also just always in the back of my head is like, who is monitoring this and allowing this, or at least like aware of what's going on? And then in the case of Dylan's wife, like, how much is she being coached? How much of this is actually her and what she wants? Like, I don't know. Lumen is shady. I don't trust a single thing that they do. So that includes these really nice moments that any Dylan is having with his Audie's wife.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. My working theory is that I think she is being very clearly instructed because we've seen Lumen use like emotional relationship between characters to kind of get what they want. And the power of human connection and whether it's friendship or romance being a powerful force that allows for a much greater level of influence that you wouldn't have with just like your coworker, right? Is a powerful tool that Lumen has definitely used in case of sending Helena back in as Helly to keep Mark satisfied and keep Mark working on Cold Harbor. And so I don't know. I feel like I wouldn't put it past Lumen, and for some reason they have something that they're holding over Audi Mark's wife that she feels like this is her only choice in order to keep them safe somehow, or there's some ulterior motive that she has that we just don't know yet, and we're going to find out hopefully. But I just thought it was so interesting the way that film was scened, because there's this almost like ambient score with that feels relaxing and soothing and creating a whole vibe for them. And there's these tall grasses, and when they kiss, that shot is filmed from behind that screen with the grasses swaying. And you can very clearly see that's a little bit opaque because we're filming that from behind the scene. And it's almost this suggestion that Lumen is creating this false experience for Dylan, that it's been constructed, is being manufactured, and every bit of that emotion and feeling and experience that he's having is carefully constructed in the way that those grasses on the screens are there, the music is playing there to get him to feel something, and so that they can continue to control him. And it's neat when the minute that they hug, that creepy, eerie score that is so Severance, also that melody comes in right at that moment too. And so it just feels like Dylan is not safe. nothing is as it seems. And there's definitely something that Lumen is pulling the strings behind all of this. And I think especially with it being intercut in that scene with the Mark and Helly moments and kind of showcasing the way that the Lumen can use these relational dynamics and these connections that are forming for their purposes to get what they want. That's my working theory, is that Lumen's behind it all. And she is somehow either having an ulterior motive or being blackmailed to do their bidding.
Yeah, I buy it. I'm here for it. Because Lumen is behind a lot of things, and they're always shady and self-interested. And I'm so interested, though, to see this kind of blow up in their faces, though. Like, you can use emotions and relationships and stuff to manipulate people, but that's also can be really volatile. And if you get somebody's heart involved into something, you don't know what they're going to do. Like, so I'm ready. I am ready for things to go off the rails. And there's a lot of areas that could happen, and I'm here for it. I'm ready. Let's freaking go.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope that like Lumen has calculated and believed that sending Helena back in as Helly was the right choice to keep Mark satisfied enough to keep working on Cold Harbor, but they ain't doing much work. You know what I mean? And if anything, like the two of them aligned in their mission together could be a powerful force that Lumen has no idea what's coming for it. So I am here for this as well. I would like to see this. I would like to see everything blow up in Lumen's face, but specifically some of those things that they thought that they were outsmarting everyone else in would be really fun.
Yeah, a little comeuppance would be nice.
Yeah, we want to see that. We want to see that for sure. Okay, some other big things that happen in this episode, I think that stands out to you in particular.
Well, I guess we're going to have to talk about Mark, aren't we?
Yes, we are. One of your favorite characters on this show.
I don't get it, man. I'm back on the I don't get why Mark is so special train. I'm also I'm having the opposite problem as the characters in the substance. I'm having a hard time viewing Mark as two separate individuals, even though his innie and his outie are one person, but they're two distinct. My brain is struggling with that because I keep struggling with the whole like you're supposed to be searching for your dead wife who is not dead ? And the like, oh, you're really into Helly business. Like I'm struggling with those two things. I understand feelings are complex. Your wife died. You're developing feelings for this other person. Cool. There's some conflict there, and I'm fine with that. But there's not enough conflict there, I think, for me. And so I'm just like, bro, you slept with Helena, and now you slept with Helly. What are you doing to find your wife? Like, what is going on? I don't understand. And then I think I would also be fine if he was like, you know what, like that part of my life is over. She died. Cool. I'm moving on and I'm going to live my life. Cool. Okay. I'm struggling with those two things coexisting, and there's not enough tension in Mark for me. But I keep having to remind myself that it's any Mark that is into Helly, and he was just searching for Gemma almost as like a favor to his outie self, not because he actually feels something for Gemma. And it's outie Mark that wants to find Gemma and doesn't even know about Helly. I keep having to try and like remind myself of that fact because I'm like, what the hell, Mark? You're off task. You're supposed to be finding your wife, bro. So I'm having a hard time with our dude. It's fine. To me, it's just Mark, but I need to do better in my brain of separating him, which is probably a stupid exercise because now he's reintegrated, presumably. So now maybe he'll be one and I can be okay with Mark again. I don't know. We're going to see what happens. I don't know what to do with him.
Yeah, I was going to say, this whole reintegration thing's not going to help your cause because once you're going to get there and you're going to be like, okay, they're two humans, he is not going to be one human. Or he's going to have these little flashes of insight from one or the other, and we don't actually know what either side knows. You know what I mean? I think that's the other part of this that maybe is making it confusing too, because we as the viewers obviously know all of the details, but like it's sometimes unclear. Like, what does any Mark know? What does Audi Mark know? What do we know that they don't know? It's a lot. It's a lot.
And I do think like reintegrated Mark, and especially like if he gets all of those memories and he gets all of those feelings for Helly, I think that's going to be a really interesting character wrestle, because
Yeah.
it has been segmented. Audi Mark caring about Gemma, Innie Mark caring about Helly. What do you do when those two halves collide into one person and you have these really strong, complex feelings for both of these women? What do you do? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's going to be really fascinating from a character perspective when we get there, if we get there. That's what I'm like looking forward to from Mark, because Adam Scott is a really good actor, and so he'll be able to like convey all of that wrestling, I think, really well. I just want us to get there because that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it also adds a really interesting dimension to our understanding of the implications of severance too, which is that, it's positioned as like cognitively, you now understand what's happening in one environment and you understand cognitively what's happening in your other environment, and like your two worlds come together to become full, and it's almost like the two halves become one from a like how much like the information and context that you know. But what happens to when like your heart is reintegrated too is a different question than what happens when the details of two sides of your life in your mind are reintegrated and become one, because that's when that complexity of emotions colliding together, especially two strong emotions like your romantic feelings for two women, when they come together, that's going to be really fascinating, because the show's focused and kind of positioned Severances as like being purely like in your mind, like there's two worlds, two contexts, two personalities. But what happens when your heart, like two sides of your heart, like these strong feelings that you have in these two worlds, how do they come together when, in a lot of cases, especially in the context of romance, we often think about having all of those feelings for one person, but how do you now bring two feelings, falling in love with two people at the same time, that unique experience being something to figure out all of a sudden? Like your heart is becoming one as well.
Yeah, yeah. And that'll also be fascinating too, because and it all depends on how like the reintegration everything works, but like to go from not knowing a person to then all of a sudden having these memories of like falling in love with somebody, like that would be a wild
Mm-hmm.
thing to experience. So I'm just
Mm-hmm.
it's teeing up a really interesting thing of how are they going to handle this, what's going on in Mark's brain, what he's feeling, all of these complex feels, how do they all coexist? Very fascinating stuff is hopefully coming. We shall see.
Yeah. And I think that the show is teeing up a lot of that, because when we see those moments where there's flashes of reintegration happening, it's often Audi Mark seeing Helly or Innie Mark seeing Gemma. And those two strongest parts of those experiences and those memories, those are the things that are getting reintegrated first, almost, because maybe they're the most prominent, the strongest threads in our mind, that those are the two like biggest things or most important things in our worlds and our two halves, that is what's getting flashed back and forth when the beginning of Mark's integration process is happening now. And so I think that is particularly notable too. Like when the flashes are happening, it's not Mark like sitting around chatting with Dylan. You know what I mean? It's him seeing Helly's face. And then similarly, when any Mark is seeing his outie self, it's not him maybe sitting around the table with Rickon. It's him seeing Gemma and the life or those moments of intimacy that he had with her. And so it's notable that the things that are being integrated together are perhaps the things that are most prominent or most significant for both Innie and outie Mark. Those are the things that are going to beginning to be woven together first. Out of all the things, all the memories that could have been reintegrated first, it's those that are showing up first for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's also interesting given that Mark wanted to undergo this procedure to avoid his grief. And
Yeah.
so that's also fascinating that choice was in service of shutting down emotions. And now such a big part of his reintegration is experiencing all of these emotions. Sometimes they seem to be like on overdrive, Mark is such a jerk in this
Oh,
episode, and he's
yes.
so angry for a lot of it. And so you're seeing this like volatility in Mark's emotions that we haven't seen before. And I'm very curious, like, if that is part of the reintegration process and like everything for him is being dialed up to 11, which maybe is explaining some of any Mark's decisions as well. If everything is being heightened for him, then a lot of his decisions, I feel like in this episode, would make sense. So I think the mystery around the severed procedure and what it does to your brain, because your emotions are housed in your brain. And so if somebody is messing around in there, it could be that your emotions are also being messed with because that's where they are stored.
Mm.
So that's another thing that's just kind of in the back of my brain is like what is happening to him on the outside is affecting him on the inside. And that going between the two of them, we're seeing some real volatility from Mark. So again, what is he going to be like after this reintegration process is finished? Is he going to
Oh, man.
level out a little bit? Will that volatility stay? We don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the only things we know about what reintegration has looked like is like what it's showed up for Petey, and the show didn't give us too much there. So we're really on the edge of our seat with this one. Okay, any other last big things before we give out some awards? I've got one more moment thread in this episode that I want to talk about, but any from your side?
I think another just big piece is Milchek,
Yeah,
our guy.
that's gonna be mine. Yep.
Yes. He's not in this episode a lot, and it's very interesting because episode 5 ends with him and Mark in the elevator and having this really intense moment. And in episode 5, that's when Milchek talks about, I think he said like reining in the leash or whatever his metaphor was. And then in this episode, he does not manage the severed floor, but
Yeah.
instead goes by himself and does the paperclip business and then speaks into that mirror so many times. Again, Tramel Tillman, fantastic performance. He's so good in this. I found that really interesting, though, that he was determined to be more, this is not the right word, but like harsh with his managerial style.
Yeah.
And control the severed workers. And then in this next episode, we see him not interacting with the severed workers at all. And that is just interesting. I'm curious to see how his managerial style changes over the last few episodes, because he interacted differently with Miss Wong, which makes sense because she was the one that placed the anonymous reports. So I don't know. I'm curious to see what they're going to do with him next.
Yeah. Yeah. That was one of the interesting aspects of this episode, is that because we get a whole tee up of the final scene of the previous episode is Milchek getting all up in Mark S's business. And this feels like a tension and a diversion that we don't get to see how he's showing up in this episode. So we get the whole part dinner scene, but we don't get too much of Milchek. I did think it was particularly interesting that of all of the different ways that Milchek is taking his feedback and training, the choice that the show has made to focus on language and the way that Lumen is essentially directing and putting requirements on how they want Milchek to speak in the way that is deemed acceptable to them is particularly interesting. And I think there's a lot of like implications and commentary from the show about the way that in corporate America, people with dialects, with accents, with different ways of speaking and articulating and expressing themselves are often told or suggested or pressured into having to speak in a way that sounds more like the environment that they're steeped in. And just the way that many people that come from different cultures don't feel like they can bring that fullness of themselves to work because they're being told to speak differently than how they would at home with their friends or with their families is an aspect and very much a clear part of the culture of corporate America and the systems and powers that be. So I just love that there's all this really interesting meta commentary from that Milchek moment, and specifically them designing that feedback for him to be, you need to speak in the way that we are telling you you need to be speaking.
Yeah. And even going back to, Lumen using propaganda in all of these places, like Lumen understands the power of language and the power of speech and uses it very specifically. Like it has a whole religion around it. Like
Yeah.
it is its own world and it has its own set of language. And so that's also really interesting that Milchek also has a very distinctive speaking style that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't appear to be fully in line with Lumen. Like it's close, but it's not quite up to snuff. And so that's also fascinating to see that little bit of dissonance because nobody at Lumen speaks like a normal human being, but seeing the way that the Lumen speak is slightly different than Milchek and watching him try and shift that into being acceptable language is fascinating and just shows the extent of Lumen's control too.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? I'm upset at Lewin because I love the way that Milchek speaks. He's
Oh,
so
yeah.
funny and
Yeah.
clever, and his ability to construct these interesting, meaty phrases together is so fun. And it's just getting stamped out of him. Like by the time when he's staring in the mirror and he's like, you need to grow up. I'm like, that's so much less fun than me telling you you need to eradicate from your essence childhood folly. Like, how what a loss. What a loss. And I love that the show has spent so much time for us to fall in love with Milchek and all that he is. And so like when Lumen is stamping it out of him, all his Milchek-ness, I'm also upset for him, you know?
Oh, yes, me too. Like it's painful to watch him do that. And
Yeah.
that scene is just so brilliant because we feel that pain as he's saying these words over and over and over again. And it almost feels like, when you were I don't think we did this when I was in school, but like you've seen it in the movies where a kid gets in trouble and then he has to go like write something on the board 100 times or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it has that feeling to it, but it's getting to a deeper part of who Milchik is and like his value and worth and like who he is as a human being isn't good enough for Lumen. Like there's all of that
Mm-hmm.
wrapped into it as well.
Yeah.
And you just see the pain on his face as he's just saying these words to himself, trying to push it out and like stamp who Milchik is out of himself. Like,
Yeah.
it's so hard to watch.
Yeah. 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 And the anger too, the anger, the frustration, but like him knowing that he needs to fall in line in this way for, to keep his job, essentially. It's all woven in there. It's a great moment. It's a great scene. Can't wait to see more of Milchek in the next episode. Okay, let's give out some TVNS awards, shall we? All right. So the first category is for Employee of the Week. What is your choice for this week?
I want to give it to my guy Fields for helping to host the most awkward dinner of all time.
Nice, nice. He successfully does his job. I love that Bert calls him out too. It's like, Fields, you're humiliating our guest, my dude.
So good.
I'm going to give it to Irv on the other end of this
Yeah.
for surviving the most awkward dinner of his life that He did
Heck
not
yeah.
know what he was walking into, but he did a great job.
He did. I wanted to give it to all three of them, but that felt like a bit much for a singular employee of the week. So I'm glad that we got 2 out of the 3
2 out of 3.
in our awards.
Yep. Okay, the next category is Move the Needle Moment. What is your choice for this one?
My choice is Helena getting some Chinese food.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. The lumen, the tentacles are far reaching. Oh man. That was great. That was great. When she says, Hannah, sorry, Gemma. It's like the way that was so intentionally planned and strategic is it's genius, but also so cutting. Ooh, that's a good one. I am going to give this award to Bert for his ultra complicated facial expression as he closes the front door in the final 10 seconds of the episode. So much flashing across Christopher Walken's face. I love it. I'm like, ooh, there's a lot there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And because there's so much there, we're probably going to see more of Bert.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Yep. You are so pleased.
I am.
Okay, the next category is achievement and corporatees. Sarah, what is your choice for this one?
Okay, I got to give it to our guy Milchek when he says grow.
Yeah.
Just a singular grow.
Just a singular grow. It went from eradicating from your essence childhood folly to just grow. How boring.
And so sad.
Yeah. Nice.
But he did it. He successfully succumbed to the corporatees. So.
Yeah, he did indeed. Alas. I'm giving this award to Helena, who says to Audi Mark, we take pride as a company to be better than that, and we will be better. How many times have we heard that from a corporate company that's done some shady stuff and covered it up and then covered it up again and then they got caught, so then they have to issue the public PR statement, to save the reputation. Some good stuff right now. Like, this sounds oddly way too familiar.
Right?
Yeah.
Severance hit it on the nose again.
They did indeed. Okay, looking ahead, what are you excited to see as we head into the second half of this season?
Okay, we got to talk about this because there is yet another episode with a distinct lack of harmony.
Yeah.
Where is our girl? What is she doing?
I don't know.
Where is she? I want her to just parachute in and be an agent of chaos. That's just what I want. Like, there's a little chaos happening between all of our characters. I just want somebody to come in and just blow a hole in Lumen somehow. Like,
yep.
I want something insane to happen. Obviously, there's been a lot of like crazy things that have happened, but like, I want Harmony as a vindictive rage monster to just come in and just upturn some stuff. That would be so much fun.
I want the last episode of the season. Like, we think we're going to get a big splashy finale, okay? But all we get is like And meanwhile, when this scene was happening in season 2 of Severance, this is what Harmony was doing. And just her like snooping around, her like eating dinner. And then after dinner, she goes out and like stalks some people, like collects the little things in her box that she needs. She's got her like whiteboard of her grand plans. I would love that. Just like what was happening all this time that led her to just absolutely wreck shit. It's gonna be good.
Honestly, I'd be here for that. And
she's doing something.
Arquette is so much fun to like hang out with as Harmony. Like, let's go. Maybe Harmony has been pulling off some like elaborate capers or something. And I mean, we already know like the Harmony and Mrs. Selvig situation. So maybe she adopted another persona and she's doing something with that. Like, I don't know. There's not enough harmony in these episodes, and I think that needs to be rectified very soon.
Which, I'm like, the show knows that we are wondering, and the show's teed her up It's not like, oh, she's never been in this season at all because like they fired her and she's out. Like no, we got seeds of her at the beginning for sure. So something's happening with her.
Mm-hmm. I hope so.
Yeah.
So outside of her, I want to see more Bert, Irv, and Fields. They're great. All three of them had a great time. I'm curious who Hannah is. Like, Hannah sounds a little bit like Gemma, but like if you were trying to like fake a name, Emma would have been a better fake name that you forgot instead of Hannah. So who is Hannah? What are we doing there? What else is going on here? I don't know. More Milchick time.
More Milchick time
Miss
always.
Wong time.
Yeah.
Like I just really want stuff to start going off the rails. Is kind of where I'm at though. And I think Harmony is a great vehicle for that.
Yeah, we're putting all our money on her.
That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. Yeah. And also like there's no way. She's so interesting. The show's got to use her. They know they're sitting on something good with her. I mean, at this point, I'm like, just make something happen, please. The show. I need a big, meaty, explosive, thrilling episode 7. Otherwise, I'm going to be back here next week and I'm going to be more upset than I am this week. So I just want to see some things actually happen. I think that I almost envision like, you're at the top of the hill and like, this is the second half of the season. So like, we're at the top. We're getting our wheels turning, and I just want to see some momentum as gravity does its thing, and our cart runs squarely down this very steep hill. So I've got the goat room. Are we going to find out more about that? I got to, continue to advocate for the goat storyline here. And we have not learned anything about any of those people in that room at all yet. I did peek at some of the episode titles that are next, because it's listed on the show page. And interesting that I think the next episode name is quite notable and kind of cryptic, so that'll be fun. And then the finale's episode title is called Harbor. So maybe some answers are coming our way and more questions with them. But I think that there's some interesting things that the show's definitely consistently revisited episode to episode, and Cold Harbor is definitely one of them. So some answers there would be great. And then my growing curiosity and suspicion around Audie Dylan's wife is going to be fun to see what they do there. So I would like to see something that happened there. And then I know I've said a bunch of times, like, I want to know what's going on with Miss Wong, but I don't know if the show's going to give it to us in this season. So they really haven't continued to tee that up or like stoke our curiosities there. So that might be like season 3 and beyond thing, as we just like get reunited with like, where's Gemma and where's Miss Casey, and maybe there'll be some answers there. But up until that point, I don't know. The show's not giving us a lot to work with. So
yeah, maybe we will see though if Miss Wong is in fact Wintertide material, whatever the hell that is, and
right?
if she gets through her fellowship, whatever that is. Like, it's just, oh man, Lumen is just a black box, and we'll see what the show gives us. And that's it, because who knows?
And I just want answers, okay? Like, I don't do well with all this question marks and wondering and ambiguity. I'm like, no, give me just something definitive to chew on. Like, throw me a bone. Let me be satisfied with some crumbs for a hot sec that I can at least, like, satiate myself with as we continue to trek on in this journey, Yeah.
And we need answers to the goats. Like, we can live with a lot of unanswered questions, but goats, we must know.
Yeah.
Come on.
Well, we'll be here to find out. We shall indeed, as we continue our journey in the second half of this season. So this was our review and discussion of episode 6. You can find it available with the rest of the episodes on Apple TV+. Thank you for listening to today's episode of TV and Us. Our name sums it up. We're big fans of TV and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today as we continue our journey through Severance Season 2. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune to your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about Episode 6. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky on TVNS Pod, or email us at tvnspod@gmail.com. We have another show called Movies and Us, and it is very much Oscar season right now. So the Oscars are this upcoming Sunday, and we have a really fun Oscar wager that we always do as a tradition on Movies and Us, and we always share all of our thoughts, reactions, hot takes about the Oscars right afterwards. So that episode will be coming out soon after this Sunday's ceremony. So here, back on TV and Us, we will be back very soon to review and discuss episode 7 of Severance. In the meantime, we hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again with y'all very soon.